All right, well, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth of our 6 free open forums, Telemedicine Now and How, made possible by a grant from the California Healthcare Foundation. Today's theme is best practices for hosting sensitive conversations by video. And our very special guest this week is Dr. Brook Calton, Associate Clinical Professor in the UCSF Division of Palliative Medicine, San Francisco. The forums are presented by CSU Shiley Institute for Palliative Care in partnership with ResolutionCare, pioneering telemedicine in Northern California. I'm Jennifer Ballentine, Executive Director of the Institute, and I'll be your moderator today, unless I get booted off, in which case someone will take over, and then I'll be back, and it'll all be fine. The CSU Institute for Palliative Care is a workforce initiative of the California State University system, offering online education in palliative care for frontline clinicians and healthcare organizations. And now I'll introduce our facilitators. Michael Fratkin is a builder, innovator, and dreamer who approaches life and the practice of medicine with love and respect, incorporating principles of value-based payment, technology-enabled service delivery, and interprofessional team integration. Dr. Fratkin and his team have created ResolutionCare Network to build capacity for high-quality, home-based palliative care in rural Northern California and beyond. Dr. Brian Mistler is Chief Operating Officer at ResolutionCare, a benefit corporation committed to leveraging healthcare technologies to deliver quality care to a racially, economically, and geographically diverse population that includes large areas of Northern California. Dr. Mistler is a healthcare leader with a deep understanding of the strategies that drive business impact and educational change. Dr. Brook Calton directs home-based palliative care services for UCSF. Dr. Calton and her interprofessional team of palliative care physicians, social workers, nurses, and chaplains care for homebound UCSF patients, providing specialized symptom management, understanding what is most important to patients and families, collaborating with patients' caregivers and outpatient providers, and facilitating care transitions when patients are hospitalized or discharged to facilities. So without further ado, take it away.
Well, welcome back, community, and welcome to the forum for all of you that have not yet participated. This is organized to invite you to participate. For those of you that are hiding behind obscurity, I would like to encourage you once more to turn on your video. It's kind of the magic of this strange way of communicating with each other. It's kind of relevant to, hi, thank you. It's kind of relevant to the material that we're here to talk about, and I invite you to be brave. Come forward and participate as a video visage of yourself. I am super excited to introduce Brook Calton, Professor of Palliative Care and Symptom Management Services at UCSF, part of my sort of neighborhood tertiary care center and a collection of incredibly dedicated and talented individuals in the palliative care space. Brook and I have been working together on a couple of publications and working together as colleagues over the years, and always looking forward to inviting her forward. Brook, would you go ahead and introduce yourself in ways that I didn't? And tell folks what you've got to introduce today's forum with. You have to unmute yourself, Dr. Calton.
First step of telemedicine is to unmute yourself. It's nice to be with you all. Thanks so much for joining us and for having me. I thought I would just give a couple introductory comments, and then I know we're going to try to keep this as informal as possible and have some discussion. So our topic today can be broad, but one of the things that I'm becoming more and more interested in is how we have difficult and sensitive conversations by video, and how that may be the same or different than when we do it in person. In terms of a little bit of background, so at UCSF, which is where I practice both in clinic and also in people's homes. We were doing in clinic before COVID, over 50% of our visits were by telemedicine. So we were doing a lot. And then now with COVID, all of our visits essentially are by telemedicine. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of different practices as we attempt to socially distance and preserve PPE. So we have a lot of difficult conversations by video. And I think our whole interprofessional team has been very surprised and heartened to see that we think build really good rapport over video. There are people that we're caring for that live hundreds of miles away that we may never have even met in person. And we feel like we're able to provide very good care to them and have difficult conversations with them relatively effectively. I wanted just to share, I promised that I wouldn't share too many slides, but I couldn't help myself, and I promise it's not a didactic, but I did want to share a little bit of data from a recent satisfaction survey that we did, which relates to this topic of sensitive conversation. So let me just see here. What I wanted to show you was we just this summer, and this will be coming out hopefully once I write the paper on it tomorrow, but we did a survey with 35 of our patients that were seen in outpatient palliative care and 15 of our caregivers that had been seen at least once over video visit within the last couple months. And it was a pretty extensive telephone survey. And I'm just going to share a tiny bit of the data here as sort of a jumping off point. But just wanted to share, not surprisingly, because I think we know this across the board, whether you're doing palliative care or you're doing other medical specialties, that patient and caregiver satisfaction with telemedicine visits was very high when we asked our patients about it. And so the average satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 10 was an 8.9 for patients. And you can see here that the majority of patients both agreed that they'd recommend receiving palliative care by video visits to others, and also agreed that they would do another video visit if it was offered by my palliative care team. So essentially the orange and the blue blocks are those that agreed. Caregiver satisfaction was equally high, 8.8 out of 10, and the caregivers agreed to the same statements as well. What I wanted to show you was a little bit of interesting data related to sensitive conversations. So we asked patients and caregivers if they agreed that it was easy to communicate with their palliative care team during their video visits, and 100% of the 35 patients agreed that it was. 93% of caregivers agreed it was easy to communicate with their palliative care team during a video visit. And I thought this was really amazing. 97% of patients, there was only one person that didn't agree. 97% of patients agreed they felt comfortable discussing sensitive or emotional topics over video, and 100% of caregivers agreed. So this kind of justified what we felt was true, but really nice to see this data. The final piece of data that I just wanted to show you was we also asked patients and caregivers, we gave them a list of 9 different sensitive or emotional topics and asked them, would you prefer to talk about this specific topic in person, by video, you don't have a preference, or you don't want to talk about it at all? And I just wanted to share that with you. So this is for patients, and essentially the data for caregivers looks pretty darn similar, but you can see across the bottom that the blue bars, when things are in blue, that's that the patient indicated that they preferred to talk about that topic in person. If it was orange, that meant they preferred video. The gray was no preference, and the yellow was they preferred not to discuss at all. So there were very few things that people preferred not to discuss at all, which I thought was also interesting in and of itself. But you can see that for the most part, if you were to combine, you can see the blue bars, there was really only one thing that even exceeded over 25%. So roughly about 30% of patients said that they would prefer to receive bad news in person, whereas the remaining 75% of people said that they either, a small percentage preferred video, and then the other folks really had no preference at all. And then for the majority of the other topics, there was a smaller proportion of people that said that if they were going to talk about their preferences for intensive medical treatments, they might prefer to do that in person. There was about 15% of people that said that they'd prefer to talk about advanced care planning and complete documents for that in person. But otherwise, you can see a lot of orange and gray, where people said that they either preferred video to talk about these things, or they didn't have a preference. And when we went and we took a deeper dive and looked, not surprisingly, people's preferences for either not having a preference or for preferring video were stronger if they lived farther away. So people who lived less than 50 miles from our medical center, they felt a little bit more strongly that maybe doing some of these things in person would be valuable. But if you live far away, they were just as happy to save the trip and do it over video. And like I said before, for the most part, the results for caregivers were quite similar. So I think really interesting, and what I'd love to explore with folks today, and I know a lot of us would have some thoughts about, is just how we go about creating these safe and supportive spaces to have these conversations by video. Would also be really curious if folks have thoughts, and I can provide mine as well. Like, are there certain topics that are just off limits and we should absolutely do them in person? And if so, what people's experiences have been with those?
Fantastic, Brooke. Fantastic. Jennifer, there was a couple of the questions that came in the registration piece were really related to some of the things that Brooke talked about. Could you bring those forward?
Sure, absolutely. We did have a couple of questions submitted ahead of time. The first one was, what might be the nuanced dimensions we need to be aware of when hosting sensitive conversations? When you're in that conversation about one of the many topics there, what kinds of things are you needing to take into account?
Go ahead, Brooke, you take that.
Sure. So I could talk about this for days, but for the sake of being short, I'll just mention a couple things. I think there's basically the way that I think about it is, how do you set up the visit beforehand to create a safe and supportive space? What are the things that you can do right off the bat when you get in, quote, the room with that person or their family? And then what can you do during the visit in terms of communication to enhance the work that you're doing? In terms of setting up the visit, and again, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'll try to be brief. I think a couple things are really important, which is really trying to sort of put on your hat as like a film director and thinking about what is your space like? So that may seem obvious, but is it a really distracting background, or is it nice and gentle? Some of us are using a virtual background like I am, so you can't see my kids if they run in, but hopefully that's not happening during your visits. What is the lighting like? And so you can check that beforehand. Make sure your audio works, obviously, just to prevent awkwardness as you go into the visit. One of the things that my chaplain yesterday was talking to me about was, not only making sure that you're making eye contact with the camera and not looking down, because depending on where my eyes is, it really impacts your impression of my attention, but also the angle of your camera. And so this may be a very different experience than if it's like this, where I might feel a little bit less connected to you. So we were playing around with angles. And so this was the best angle I found for myself, but I think playing around with that is important. In terms of once you get into the room, again, putting on that director hat, don't be afraid to it may be the first visit that your patient is doing by telemedicine. So don't be afraid to say, like, hey, you're really backlit. Do you think you could shut that window? Or could you move so that I could see you a little bit better? Or, oh, I noticed that you're there with your husband. Does he want to be a part of the conversation? And if so, could you bring him onto the screen with you so that I can see both of you? I feel like I sometimes forget to do that and then realize halfway in that, like, Bob is over there and wants to be a part of the conversation, but I can't even see him. So I think those are a couple things that can be really helpful, and that you really kind of need to take an active role in, because your patient isn't going to know that. And then maybe I'll stop there just to get people's impressions and thoughts, and then a little bit later.
I just think that's just right on. It's so validating, and we haven't talked so much about this topic, the sort of nuance of acceptability. But these are all things that we've been talking about in these forums, and things that I talk about quite a lot. And I really appreciate it. Like, for example, poor Ellen Brown is backlit over there, and I can barely see her face. Now I can see, okay, I'm just kind of teasing you. But as I look around, and as you look around in the Zoom images that you see,
well, Michael, there you go. Now you're back.
We lost you for a second.
And don't be. Oh, I was reinforcing and playing around with the images that we're all dealing with right now. You have the opportunity now to look at, looks like 65 different individuals, some that have chosen to keep their video off or can't have it on, and then the different kind of examples that each of these participants are. How far you move into the camera and how far you move back is also something that's really important and useful. When you look up into the camera, I agree with Brooke that you can do that very purposefully. You know, some of you have glasses on, and maybe you paid the extra $32 to have the glare-less glasses. I didn't. And actually, it provides me with a little bit of room and a prop to take off when it's necessary in a meeting. It also gives me a chance to, if I have to drop back and hide a little bit in an encounter, I do that. When there's with more than one people and people need space to talk, I can shrink my little head and drop back. And even if I get a text, if I lean back, if that text, I just scan it to see whether or not it's a clinical immediate need, I can drop back and do that. So there are different ways that you can use the space thoughtfully and intentionally. One of the things, Brooke, that we talked about quite a lot previously is that, what was I going to say? Oh, never mind. But what you were saying about being the director, I love that concept, and being able to say to people, okay, we've got all the lights and cameras and angles and backlit and everything else. We know who's in the room. I always then say, and so now let's begin the encounter. And that takes us into that next phase where you allow the technology to essentially disappear. But let's see what people have to say otherwise.
Great. It looks like Edward has a question. Edward, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and then see if you can ask your question.
Okay, unmuted. First question is about sample. Sample characteristics. You know, with 35, that's not 100, so
right.
Percentages are a little difficult to understand with reference to graphing them. So just a practical thing, I recommend using the number of the, if it's less than 100, the number of it over the 100 mark or something like that. Secondly, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the sample because my doctorate is from UCSF. I'm very familiar with the campus, having spent many years there in laboratories. But what I'm concerned about is that Northern California is not South Florida, where I am. And the characteristics of spirituality, religiosity, many things are different across the United States. Would you address those issues, please?
Yeah, Brooke, your chaplain, is it Judy Long that you were making reference to? Is it Judy?
I was talking, we have a couple different chaplains, yeah, so I was talking about a different chaplain, yeah, but.
Just as a parenthetically, Judy Long will be joining us next week as we take the sort of connection to a deeper level. She's a chaplain, the UCSF Symptom Management Service, and has a lot of enthusiasm for what's possible using these technologies. So that's a parenthetic response. What I can say is that in Brook's survey, we had a similar survey with something like 70 responses. We didn't ask exactly the same questions or generate the same kind of data set, but they were very much an overlapping experiential assessment. Again, not the Bay Area predominantly, but rural Northern California, which probably starts to look a little bit more like much of the rest of the country. But your point's well taken in terms of the sort of resolution of that data set.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important to think about how, I mean, this was not a randomized control trial where we were randomizing people to video or not. These were people that all agreed on their own to do video visits. So you're skewing the population already. And then, you know, it's a little generalizable. I think it gives us some data. I think to the point that someone made in the chat, I think Lynn made the point in the chat. I think it's still totally true that, you know, we have this information. This was a population of specific patients at UCSF, and how you choose to apply that is going to vary. But absolutely, regardless of what you're talking about, I think asking for permission to have that conversation is going to be key. So please don't take this data and then say, oh, I can just go ahead and do that. I think asking for permission is going to be key, and being very clear about that, particularly over video where someone's body language and nonverbal cues may be a little bit harder to pick up on. So asking it as a very clear question, getting a yes or no, and then checking in along the way as you proceed in that conversation. You know, how is this feeling to you? Is this feeling okay? Is it okay with you if we continue? If you're not clear, someone's looking down, or you're just not clear on someone's emotion because it might be harder to read, just ask them, like, just wanted to check in and see how you're feeling right now, or how this conversation is sitting with you, because it's a little harder, I think.
I think that's right. That's really it's something that we never really think to do in a clinical environment, which is its own imposing environmental context for an engagement, to break I don't know what they call it in the theater, when you break the spell, when the suspended disbelief is set to the side for a second, and you say, oh yeah, by the way, we're having a telemedicine encounter. How's that going for you? Before you return back to the content of the communication. I think that's really good advice. Like, if you're wondering if you're losing them to some of the limitations of the technology, just ask them. I think that's really, really good advice.
That leads into one of the questions that we had before. You touched on this a little bit already, Brooke, but somebody had asked about privacy concerns, that if the patient that you're talking to needs someone to help them get set up and to get settled and to get familiar with the technology, but then you want to talk to them privately, how do you sort of excuse the person from their own room? Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah.
I know how I do it. How do you do it, Brooke?
Well, how do you do it? And then I have a comment.
I just excuse the person.
Yeah.
Right. I just say, thank you so much.
Be the director. Yeah.
Yeah, I take on my director hat again, and as a physician, with the sort of power vested in me by the person who's asked me to help them, I move things around as needed to forward the action. So I don't hesitate to ask Bob to provide us some room for privacy, or ask Jane, if she's my person, the person I'm seeing, do you mind changing your location so that we have the opportunity for privacy that you desire? She's going to be more in control of that than me.
The other thing I just wanted to add to what Michael was saying is more of just an observation, which is, which I'd just be curious to hear people's thoughts about, because I do think some of the informal exchanges that we have in clinic, and certainly we have at home. So if I'm in clinic and then my patient says, doc, I got to go to the bathroom. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm like, okay, go to the bathroom. And then their caregiver is in the room with me, and I can provide some individualized caregiver support. You know, it provides an opportunity for the caregiver to say, like, oh my God, I'm losing it at home. This is so hard. Like, how much longer does so-and-so have? Whatever that question or conversation is that they need to have, those spaces are created in clinic. They're created at home when you're like, hey, Jim, could you just like take me to see the bedroom so I can see what the setup is there? And then you have this like really meaningful connection and conversation. Those are much trickier, I think, to create. I mean, I think there's probably opportunities similar to sort of saying when I just want to speak to the patient right now, like, hey, Jim, my patient, is it okay if I talk to Susan for a little bit on her own as well? But it certainly does take some intentional effort and confidence to be able to do that.
And I wouldn't underestimate all of the tricks that you have for the environments that you've already been working in. Like, you have all kinds of skills and nuanced ways of communicating to get the information that's going to help you help this person. You do it in the clinic. You walk people out to their car every now and again. You do what you have to do to engage with the caregiver and do it with respect and consent and occasionally with authority. So this is just it's kind of a new frontier, and it has its own quirks as well as its own opportunities. The one thing that Edward said, Edward Friedman, when his question, I kind of would like to hear from you all a little bit more about the rest of the country, because not all of us are Bay Area centered. There's a few of you, I'm sure, that are coming in from other places and can talk a little bit about acceptance and of telehealth technology. What I can speak while somebody's I hope somebody shakes out of the crowd to comment on that, is that I've been doing CAPC-based virtual office hours on this topic as well. And that environment is more national. And I'm hearing from people from Virginia and Missouri and Florida and all over the country. And while I'm sharing information, I'm also inviting reports from the field about how their patients are accepting and adapting to the imposition that COVID-19 has made in rapid adoption of telehealth. What I can say completely anecdotally is that the kinds of reports from Brook's group and the kinds of reports that you get from ResolutionCare Network are consistent with the experiences that people are having. They're surprised. They may have had a little bit more resistance to adoption than we in the technology obsessed Bay Area and Northern California environment have. But boy, the experience has been surprisingly favorable from patients and caregivers anecdotally. So good. So Jennifer, you got some questions.
We're getting a lot of questions. It's great to see
Bring
the
them.
presentation. So this is kind of a little bit of a change of tune here, but any ideas on how to convince nurses and administrators to support using video visits instead of in person? And the person adds that this has been a major barrier for us even now in the crisis.
Yeah.
Go ahead, go, Brooke.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that we all see this to a certain extent, and there's going to be early adopters and mid adopters and late adopters. I know that a lot of the hospice nurses that I work with, and also some of the geriatricians that have been practicing for a long time taking care of older adults, there's just a lot of worry that the technology is going to get in the way of their ability to provide good care and their ability to build rapport. A lot of people that are doing home visiting feel like for isolation and loneliness, it's important to be in someone's home. And I would argue that sometimes that's true. And also not everybody wants you in their home. And it might be a relief for some people to not have to clean up their living room or get, fully dressed except from the waist up. So I think one of the best things to do is to ask people what they're worried about, and just allow them to share that, not, necessarily providing all the evidence base behind why telemedicine works and is good, but I think allowing people to sort of share what they're concerned about, and then figuring out, like, if they're not comfortable doing it on their own, might they be willing to join you for a visit so they can get a little bit more comfortable with the technology. I have really found that once people do a couple and they gain a little bit of confidence, they're like, oh, that was actually pretty good. But there is this invisible barrier of like doing the first one that people need to get over to start feeling comfortable, I think.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize and reinforce everything you just said, Brooke. That's exactly right. If you can figure out a way to get those people with their resistance to have an experience, the experience itself will begin to transform their resistance. I imagine way back when using the telephone was a bit of a stretch for people to have meaningful and important conversations via telephone. And I think that we're all discovering professionally as well as inside of our families that we can meaningfully connect. I know that in my family, and I'm hearing from lots of other people, we're more connected. We're talking to each other and seeing each other more than we actually had been in the sort of routine, busy lives that we were living before sheltering in place. So I think it's a matter of getting people the experience they need to draw their own conclusions.
We've got a couple of questions about those kind of conversational dynamics that I'm going to combine together. So the first one is, how do you handle conversations when the patient or family either says they don't want to have this conversation or they want to discontinue it? And then sort of on the flip side of that, how do you bring several family members into a conversation, particularly around goals of care, if they're living in different homes or even different cities? So
that's exciting. Brooke, talk about the family meetings, please.
With people in different rooms? In
different places, different rooms.
It's so cool. It's so
right?
cool. So cool. Yeah, I think that's one of the most probably underused and also really awesome parts of telemedicine. And you could imagine that everyone, so not only your patient, but you and maybe their son who's in Pennsylvania, could all be in their separate locations over Zoom. And so you're creating a new way for a family meeting to happen and for the son who's worried in Pennsylvania to be involved in his loved one's care. And that's pretty easy. Obviously, like, you got to make sure they have the link or however you're doing your video visits and make sure they know how to use the technology too. So there is, that's not to say that there's absolutely administrative setup. And I think, technicalities and effort that goes into doing that. But I think it's really, really neat. And I think the other thing to think about, both during COVID and also afterwards, as we sort of loosen up regulations and start seeing people in person more, is you can still use that technology. So even if you're in the room or in someone's home with your patient, you could still bring in the son from Pennsylvania to be present virtually. So I think really powerful technology that patients and families and caregivers are so appreciative of.
Yeah. Jennifer, can you tell me I got so excited about the second part of that question, I forgot the first part. What was the first part of that last question?
The first part was really about if you're talking about these difficult topics, how does someone say, I don't want to talk about this anymore? How can they just continue the conversation?
Oh, we discontinue the conversation if they choose not to. I mean, palliative care may be different than other specialties, but maybe not. But they're the boss. So if they're, if I've, maybe stumbled or bumbled and created an unworkable communication space, and they say stop, we stop. If people say they don't want to do their advanced care planning with me, we don't do that. We search for the things that they do identify as important that are acceptable in there. So, this is you know, the world of healthcare, we have behind us, we have a bunch of requirements and guidelines and boxes to check and everything else that are designed to be person-centered and in the best interest of the people we care for, but sometimes they don't see it that way. And so forget the checking of the boxes and the getting the menu handled. We let them define, at least in palliative care, we're able to let them define what are the areas that they do wish to lean into and work on. And sometimes that's not the things that my checklists say I'm supposed to do.
Great. So we have a more sort of practical question here about how long are patients waiting for a telemedicine appointment from the time they send a message saying they want one, and has that changed, or is it any different during the current pandemic?
So I guess there's a lot of different ways to answer that. It probably would help to just get a little bit of clarity about the question. Riffing off of that, I can say that, you know, in our own clinic, where we were doing half of our visits by telemedicine and now we're doing all of them, we have stayed busy, whereas I know a lot of specialties are having different experiences, but we have stayed very busy, in part because I think we are spending extra time and attention to just attending to the distress of the COVID pandemic and the isolation and accompanying mood symptoms that some of our patients and caregivers are feeling. So we get people in, you know, within a week or two if it's a new referral, but that's obviously going to vary for where you are. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about telemedicine visits is that maybe a patient messages me through the electronic medical record saying that they're not feeling well or they're concerned about a new symptom. And rather than try to like hash that out over the medical record or getting on the phone, I can just say, like, could we see each other at 1 p.m. over video? And that gives me so much more of a sense of how people are doing than if I'm on the phone with them, or if I'm trying to do it typing electronically with them. And you can bill for that, so that's great. And I think it's just, a picture says 1,000 words, so you can just gain so much information even before you start the conversation, just by seeing, like, okay, where are they sitting? Are they where they normally are? Are they in their chair? Are they in bed? Do they look distressed? Do they look uncomfortable? Do they look just fine? And then that's very reassuring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brooke, do you notice that now that you're doing 100% video conferencing for all the outpatient work that you've been up to, have you noticed that there's more wiggle room in your schedule, more efficiency at all, or?
I do think that telemedicine visits often are a little bit shorter. So I think that there's often a little bit less chit chat kind of at the beginning. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, that may be a bad thing, but I don't know. I do think they tend to be a little bit more focused. And obviously, if you're also someone that's doing home visits, you're saving a ton of time, not driving to their house and parking and getting settled in their home. So in that ways, there's some efficiency. I have struggled having, you know, back-to-back video visits for a whole afternoon or day with a tiny break in between. One thing that I've just personally noticed is that there is not these natural breaks in your clinical time. And so whereas, like, I would have to wait for my patient to be roomed before I saw the next patient, so I'd have time to, like, get a sip of water, just like take a deep breath. It's really up to me to create that space. And so I'm trying very intentionally to just make sure I protect a little bit of time between my visits so that I can, like, stretch or get something to eat, or just, like, even walk out on our patio for a second, because I think for my own well-being and in order for myself to be as present as I want to be with my patients, I think that's really, really key.
Yeah, no, I think that's super duper important for sure. The reason I asked about efficiency is we find now, of course, your patients are seeing some extraordinary gains without having to get dressed, get in the car, get to the clinic, schlep in, park the car, and all that stuff. Even though for us, we're not realizing that with the difference between telehealth. They certainly are. But for us, in terms of the gains that we've made by not driving and going out to folks for physically in the home care, we've realized that there are real efficiencies and that have provided more capacity to be responsive for same-day appointments for episodic changes. And dropping into those encounters with people with whom we've made relationships happens really generally efficiently because there's a reason they called, and that's your target for the intervention. And then their routinely scheduled or appointment can happen later on. But we're finding more ability to be responsive. We're also comprehensively team-based. So it's not all about the provider or the physician or nurse practitioner who is the center of the care delivery model. Ours is very team-based. So our coordinators, our community health workers, our nurses, our social workers, our chaplains, and are all nimble and able to just drop in and be responsive when people say they have an unscheduled need.
Yeah, I want to tee off that a little bit just with a question that's occurred to me. I mean, in my real life, in the office, I often have days that are back to back meetings. And then now that I'm, at home in a virtual setting, I have back to back Zoom meetings. And I do find that at the end of the day, after a back to back Zoom meetings, I am exhausted. And I wonder if I'm wondering about the effect on the clinician, of those back to back Zoom meetings. If there's a different kind of energy this is calling upon or requiring you to put forward that is more draining.
I think we don't know, but I think universally or quite commonly people are echoing that, saying there's been a little bit of writing beginning about Zoom fatigue or video conferencing fatigue. And I think what Brook was saying about self-care and buying time for breathing and bathrooming and checking in with your family, since we're all working from home these days, those are really important things. I think there's something about the video frame that's very attention holding. I think that may be where some of the fatigue is coming from. It's like there's nowhere to hide. You can't wander off cognitively, especially if your job is to really be showing up. So I think that's a part of it too. Brooke, thoughts?
I was just going to add one thing that I'm trying to do more of. Again, that my chaplain the other day when we were talking about this stuff just recommended, which is one strategy that I'm hoping is helpful when it comes to Zoom fatigue or telemedicine fatigue is just doing what I can to really focus on my patient in front of me. I think like we all do when we get going virtually, it's like, okay, well, I could game this system and have my patient up at the top of the screen and then I can chart or I could like look something up. And that I think in and of itself is exhausting. And so one thing that I'm just trying to do is just have my patient on the screen, which means that there's probably a drop in my productivity because I'm taking very minimal, but some notes handwritten that then I'm going to plug into my note. So that may or may not be possible for you depending on how many patients you're seeing in a day and your bandwidth. But I find for me, that way I can really just be present and focus on one really important thing. And I'm hoping that's helpful.
I hope it's helpful too. It's my strategy. I hope it's helpful. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So here's a question. Any insight on the benefits of sharing our home space with patients in building human connection, but not undermining our professional role? So the dog, for instance.
Where's my cat?
Michael's
I do a lot of this. I do a lot of this.
Wandering through, or the unmade bed in the background. How do you sort of balance that?
The unmade bed, not so much. The dog.
Make your bed.
Make your bed. Yeah, or talk to your mom about it. But the dog and the reality of my son as a part of my life, walking in, and he'll be here, I swear, and exactly at 1 o'clock or 5 minutes before. Part of what I bring as a palliative care doctor is my humanity. Actually, centrally, what I bring as a palliative care doctor is my humanity. I've got some knowledge and some experience and some tricks up my sleeve, for sure, as a physician. But who I am as a dad and a husband and a father and a dog owner, actually is part of the bridge that I create. So I use those props, sorry, Itzy, as a bridge to make connections.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting question. And I think everyone has a bit of a different take on it. I did take down the virtual background that I had based on Edward's feedback that there was like weird streaming, and I use my hands a lot. So this is our guest room. But I do think it's a super interesting question, especially as it relates to clinician and patient hierarchy. And, I would argue that there isn't a ton of a need for that. There is on very rare occasions, but I do think it's really interesting. And in a way, it's a sign of respect, I think, that I get to see into your home as the patient. And so why should that be any different, as long as it's, a professional space and my bed is made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike Rabo actually a couple of weeks ago spoke to the leveling effect of that. The idea that we're meeting these folks in their home, we're not processing them towards a clinic environment and into an exam room where they become patients. We're actually seeing them on their couch. And similarly, we're not hiding behind white coats and stethoscopes and the whole infrastructure and apparatus of a clinical environment. And so it really is actually quite leveling. And in terms of being a palliative care doctor, that is incredibly valuable for me, to be engaging with people in those terms. So yeah, I think it adds to generally, as long as Max behaves himself when he comes to visit my Zoom conferences. I introduce him and then excuse him when he shows up.
We've talked a lot about maintaining confidentiality and privacy with other people in the room or bringing them into the conversations, but then there is the question of the really unwelcome intruder of the Zoom bombing or hacking that is possible. And we had a question ahead of time about ensuring confidentiality and security with Zoom getting hacked or bombed, and what kind of recommendations you have around that, or apparatus you've put into place.
Yeah, I'd like to actually, if it's okay, ask Brian, Dr. Mistler, could you comment a little bit on the Zoom bombing security and changes in their Zoom structure?
Sure. Yeah, it's a question that I've actually gotten a few times in other forums, and it's a I don't want to minimize the issue, but what we seem to find is that it really occurs when you publicize the link, that there's a magic set of numbers that are attached to each Zoom meeting, and like a social security number or a phone number, you get a long enough set of numbers and the probability of kind of guessing one right goes way down. But when you put it out publicly on the internet, then of course people can find that and join that, and having it password protected becomes more useful. I think we're also seeing that some of the publicity around that is a little bit of a kind of corporate back and forth. You're starting to see now some of the concerns about privacy with Teams and Google and all the other ones. And I think they all have an economic incentive to stay pretty close to each other in terms of security. So with health information, we're not super worried about it, and we don't find it to be a problem if we're just sharing links with patients directly.
And there's an update, 5.0 Zoom update that I think it launches today or tomorrow, and then the prior versions of Zoom will be dead in the water at the end of the month. and they've addressed those things. We've also watched some significant improvements in security and other features of Zoom in the last 6 weeks. They've done quite a lot of work. But yeah, have any of you, Brooke or Jennifer, have you been Zoom bombed?
We haven't, and I think that's a credit to the security of the CSU SM IT department, which we're very fortunate to be hooked into. There are certainly settings that you can set for the meeting, requiring a password, for instance, or having a waiting room, various other features of Zoom in particular. I'm not as familiar with other platforms, but we have not, fortunately, had that. Just a quick time check. It is 10:01. We have about 10 minutes left, so we'll take a couple more questions. So I'm not seeing.
Can we share, Jennifer? Can we share a few references? Brooke and I recently published in the Journal of Palliative and Symptom Management, or Pain and Symptom Management, a piece that's related to the use of telemedicine in the coronavirus era. And then I've done a blog piece. There are a few things. Can we put together a set of links and have them pushed out to all the participants?
Sure. Just send us whatever you've got, and we'll put it into a set of resources.
Could I pose a question to the group
Yes.
that I've been thinking about? I was just curious to hear from this group. I had a very difficult conversation over video with a very long-term patient of mine who was very sick and near the end of their life in the hospital. And I felt like that conversation would have gone different if we had been there in person. And it wasn't just me, it was with, the hospital team, and it's complicated. But I just was curious to hear from folks, either verbally or over chat, like, do they feel like all sensitive conversations can be had if you have the right technology and communication skills by video, or are there certain ones that really are always better done the old-fashioned way? And just would love to hear from the group. It's something I've been thinking a lot about.
I think Lisa said no. There aren't any particularly off limits studies. Or as topics. Others? What I can say is that there have been situations.
Oh, Lisa said no. There are some. Yeah.
Oh, there are some. Lisa, do you want to share some ideas? What are the off limits?
You
topics?
can come off mute too if you want.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Oh, I think there you go.
Okay. I was talking about this with a couple of other folks, and just, loss and grief and how much everybody's feeling kind of off, as it were. And we all very much miss that hand holding or that physical presence where you can lean forward and say, I'm in this with you. I'll walk with you. And I feel like there are some people, not everybody, but I think there are some times where you're not going to be able to get through to that person. You're not going to be able to, we can't make it all better, but you're not going to be able to communicate that you are there for them in a way that they're able to receive.
I think that resonates probably across the whole group. When those situations are, what the topics will be, or what all of the variables, how they'll line up to identify which of those situations are, it's kind of hard to guess. I keep being surprised at what I can do. And it seemed like I had a number of times when I fell flat on my face at the bedside or in the clinic. And I haven't seen any particular patterns to where I fall flat on my face using video conferencing being different or more numerous than when I fell on my face in the clinic setting. So I think it's hard for me to identify.
I just wanted to highlight a comment that was in the chat. There's some interesting comments that people have made with a lot of what you said, Michael, in terms of it really depending on the person and the family and the context. And right now, kind of what the realistic options are. And Elizabeth Gibbs-Zender also said, for us, in-person conversations with COVID patients now involves so much PPE, it's no longer instantly connecting to be in person, which I just think is super interesting and hard.
Yeah, super hard and both interesting. I think that we're right there. I'll give it to Jennifer to wrap, but I just want to invite all of y'all to come next week. Judith Long slayed me in a conversation that we had, and her enthusiasm as an experienced chaplain working with telehealth technologies inspired me to invite her as guest faculty. So she'll be here next Thursday, and I hope that y'all join us.
Yes,
Jennifer?
yes, indeed. Thank you. And thank you very much, Brooke and Michael and Brian for being with us. And another big thanks to the California Healthcare Foundation for funding this series, and to my team for pulling it together and pulling it off. And we hope to see you all next week. And please complete the survey. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.